The smell of old paper and dried lavender was the scent of Eleanor Vance's life. It clung to the floral wallpaper in the hallways, lived in the pages of the books stacked on her nightstand, and was woven into the very fabric of the armchair where she sat, night after night, remembering her late husband, Frank. The house, a sturdy two-story colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street in Maple Creek, was the only home she'd ever known as an adult. Frank, a carpenter with hands as strong as oak and a heart as gentle as sawdust, had built it for her with his own two hands. Every creak of the floorboards was a whisper from him, every sunbeam through the kitchen window a memory of a shared breakfast. For the past 5 years since Frank's passing, her life had revolved around her son, David, his wife, Tiffany, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Eleanor was their built-in babysitter, their emergency chef, their silent, unconditional support system. She dipped into her modest savings, Frank's life insurance, more times than she could count to help them with a down payment on their flashy SUV, to fund Lily's expensive ballet classes, or to cover Tiffany's latest, must-have designer handbag. She did it without question because that's what mothers did. The trouble began subtly. Tiffany started making comments, small as splinters but just as irritating. "Ellie, dear, that floral apron is a bit dated, don't you think? We're having the Hendersons over. They're on the board at the country club. Mom, do you have to bring your casserole to the potluck? I've curated a specific menu. It's a whole vibe." David, her sweet David, never defended her. He'd just offer a weak, apologetic smile and shrug, his gaze flitting nervously towards his wife. He was a ship caught in Tiffany's powerful tide, and Eleanor was the lighthouse he was slowly, willingly leaving behind. The breaking point came on a crisp October Sunday. They had invited her over for what David called a family meeting. The air in their minimalist, gray and white living room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of her own home. Tiffany sat on a couch that looked like it was designed for display, not comfort, her legs crossed, a practiced, serene smile on her face. "Mom," David started, his voice strained. He couldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a geometric pattern on the rug. "Tiff and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. Our future. Lily's future." Tiffany placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "What David is trying to say, Eleanor, is that we're moving up in the world. David's up for a promotion, and we need our lifestyle to reflect that status. The house, your house, it's a significant asset." A cold dread, heavy and metallic, pooled in Eleanor's stomach. "What about my house?" "It's a seller's market," Tiffany said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "The equity in that property is substantial. Enough for us to finally buy the house we've been dreaming of in the Willow Creek Estates. It's an investment, really." Eleanor stared at them, her mind struggling to catch up. "You want to sell my home? Frank's home?" "Technically, it's our inheritance," David mumbled, finally looking at her. The shame in his eyes was a small, bitter comfort. "And you can't exactly manage a big house like that on your own forever, Ellie," Tiffany added, her tone dripping with false concern. "We've found the most wonderful place for you. A community, with people your own age. It's called Shady Pines Retirement Villa." Shady Pines? Eleanor knew the place. It was a blocky, beige building by the highway, rumored to smell of boiled cabbage and despair. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "But I'm your family. I take care of Lily. I help you, and we appreciate that," Tiffany said, cutting her off. "But we need to think about the big picture. Having you live with us just isn't an option. Our new house has a very specific aesthetic, and frankly, we need our space." The unspoken words hung in the air. "You don't fit in." The argument was short and brutal. Eleanor's pleas were met with David's pained silence and Tiffany's unyielding, logical cruelty. They had already spoken to a realtor. They had already put a deposit down at Shady Pines. Her life, the one she had so carefully built and maintained, was being dismantled before her very eyes, and she was powerless to stop it. 2 weeks later, she was living in a single room at Shady Pines. It was even worse than she'd imagined. The walls were thin, the color of weak tea, and the window looked out onto a parking lot. Her furniture, Frank's handcrafted pieces, had been sold off in an estate sale Tiffany organized, deemed too clunky and old-fashioned. They'd kept only a small box of photos for her. Her days bled into one another in a gray miasma of bingo games she didn't play and conversations she couldn't join. David and Tiffany visited once, bringing Lily. The little girl looked uncomfortable, her eyes wide with pity. Tiffany spent the entire 20 minutes scrolling on her phone and complaining about the smell. David promised to call more. He didn't. The house sold in a week for an astronomical sum that made the local news. Tiffany posted a picture on social media of her, and David popping a champagne bottle in front of a sold sign. The caption reading, "Leveling up. On to bigger and better things. Blessed hash new beginnings." Eleanor felt like a ghost, haunting a life she was no longer a part of. Frank's memory felt distant, buried under the rubble of her children's ambition. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. It was on a particularly bleak Tuesday morning, 3 months into her sentence at Shady Pines, that the phone in the hallway rang for her. It was a Mr. Abernathy, a lawyer from a prestigious firm downtown. His voice was deep and formal. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, my name is Charles Abernathy. I was the attorney for a Mr. Franklin Vance. I'm calling about the final disposition of his estate. There are some assets that have recently matured. I need to see you in person. Urgently." Eleanor was confused. Frank's estate had been settled years ago. It consisted of the house and his small pension. What assets could have matured? Still, the call was a crack of light in her monotonous world. She agreed to meet him the next day. Mr. Abernathy's office was the opposite of Shady Pines. It was all dark wood, leather-bound books, and the quiet hum of importance. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Vance," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming. What I have to tell you is rather extraordinary." He opened a thick file on his desk. "Your late husband, Frank, was a man of many hidden talents, it seems. He was not just a carpenter." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" 30 years ago, Frank did a series of complex carpentry jobs for a young man, a tech visionary named Alastair Finch. Alastair didn't have much money then, so instead of full payment, he offered Frank stock in his fledgling software company. A significant number of shares. Frank, it appears, saw something in the young man and agreed. Mr. Abernathy paused, letting the words sink in. "Frank never told me," she whispered. "He was a quiet man. He stipulated in his file with me that these shares were not to be mentioned or touched until one of two conditions were met. Either the company was acquired for over $1 billion, or you were no longer living in the house he built for you. He said it was his rainy day fund for you, a fail-safe." The lawyer looked at her over his spectacles. "Mrs. Vance, last month, Alastair Finch's company, Omnigen Dynamics, was acquired by a tech giant for a sum I am still struggling to comprehend. Frank's rainy day fund, after capital gains taxes, has matured. The final value credited to his estate, of which you are the sole beneficiary, is $157,428,000. The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a hammer blow against the fragile walls of Eleanor's reality. $157 million. The number was nonsensical. A joke. She stared at Mr. Abernathy, expecting him to laugh. He didn't. His expression was one of gentle sincerity. "Mrs. Vance, are you all right?" Eleanor didn't answer. The despair that had been her constant companion for months was being burned away by a new, white-hot emotion. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was something harder, sharper. It was rage, pure, righteous, and utterly focused. Frank had left her a fail-safe. He had anticipated a day where she might be vulnerable, where the home they built was no longer hers. And her own son had triggered it. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were glittering with the cold, hard light of diamonds. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice steady and clear for the first time in months. "I am more than all right. I have some work to do. First, I'd like you to arrange for my immediate departure from Shady Pines. And second, I need you to find me the best financial advisor and the most aggressive real estate investment firm in the state." The transformation of Eleanor Vance was swift and spectacular. The first thing she did was check into the most luxurious suite at the Four Seasons downtown. She threw out the drab, sensible clothes David and Tiffany had packed for her, and with the help of a personal shopper, acquired a wardrobe of elegant, tailored pieces in rich jewel tones. She had her hair styled, her nails manicured, and bought herself a simple, elegant pearl necklace, the kind Tiffany had always coveted but could never afford. She spent a week with her new financial team, a group of sharp, young Ivy Leaguers who looked at her with awe. She was a quick study. She learned about shell corporations, investment portfolios, and philanthropic trusts. The grief and helplessness that had defined her were replaced by a sharp, incisive focus. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a titan. Her first move was subtle. Through a newly formed LLC named FV Holdings, in honor of Frank, she began buying up commercial real estate in Maple Creek. A new boutique hotel, the Main Street Shopping Plaza, an office building that was home to a dozen local businesses. No one knew who was behind the purchases. The transactions were shielded by layers of legal paperwork. Meanwhile, David and Tiffany were living their dream. They had purchased a massive, modern monstrosity in Willow Creek Estates. It was all glass and steel, with a sprawling lawn and a three-car garage. Tiffany had quit her job to launch her own interior design business, Designs by Tiffany, and was burning through their windfall from the house sale at an alarming rate. She threw lavish parties, joined the country club, and chronicled every moment of her ascent on social media. Eleanor watched from a distance, a patient predator. She learned that David's company, a mid-level marketing firm, was located in the office building she had just purchased. A delicious little fact. She learned that Tiffany's new best friend, the queen bee of Maple Creek Society, Brenda Henderson, sat on the board of the local arts council, a council that was desperately seeking a new, wealthy patron. The time for subtlety was over. Her opening salvo was a call to David. "Mom, is that you? Your number is different." He sounded surprised, a little guilty. "Hello, David. Yes, it's me. I'm calling to let you know I've moved. I'm no longer at Shady Pines." "Oh, that's great, Mom. Where are you?" "You'll see soon enough," she said, her voice cool. "I also wanted to ask you a question. Do you and Tiffany still have that beautiful oak dining table? The one your father made for our first anniversary?" There was a pause. No, Mom. Tiffany sold it. It didn't really go with the new house's aesthetic." "I see," Eleanor said, the ice in her voice dropping several degrees. "That's all I needed to know. Goodbye, David." Phase 2 was the house, her house, Frank's house. It was currently on the market again. The family who had bought it were being relocated for work. FV. Holdings put in an offer, 20% above asking price, all cash, close in 3 days. The offer was immediately accepted. Eleanor had her home back. Phase 3 was societal. She made a multi-million-dollar anonymous donation to the Arts Council, with the sole condition that Brenda Henderson oversee the project. Brenda, flabbergasted and thrilled, launched an investigation to find her mysterious benefactor. A week later, Mr. Abernathy arranged a meeting. When Eleanor walked into the restaurant, poised and radiant in a sapphire blue dress, Brenda Henderson's jaw practically hit the floor. She had only known Eleanor as David's quiet, mousy mother. Now, she was looking at the woman who had just single-handedly saved the town's cultural future. Eleanor became an overnight sensation in Maple Creek's elite circles. She was mysterious, she was incredibly wealthy, and she was charming. She was everything Tiffany desperately wanted to be. The final piece of the puzzle was David's company. Through her holding company, Eleanor began a quiet but hostile takeover, buying up controlling shares from disgruntled partners. Within a month, she owned 60% of the firm. Her name was not yet on any paperwork, but she was, for all intents and purposes, the new boss. The stage was set for the finale. Tiffany, in a bid to solidify her social standing, was throwing the biggest, most ostentatious party of the year. A housewarming gala at their new estate. The guest list was a who's who of Maple Creek, and the centerpiece of the evening was to be the unveiling of her masterpiece, the home's interior design. Eleanor secured an invitation through her new best friend, Brenda Henderson. The night of the party, Eleanor arrived not in a sensible sedan, but in a chauffeured black Bentley. She stepped out wearing a custom-made emerald green gown, the pearl necklace at her throat, and a diamond bracelet, Frank's last gift to her, which she had kept hidden, glittering on her wrist. She looked like royalty. She saw Tiffany first. Her daughter-in-law was holding court by a hideous, abstract sculpture, wearing a gold dress that was trying too hard. When she saw Eleanor walk in on the arm of Brenda Henderson, her smile froze, a flicker of confusion and panic in her eyes. David rushed over. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "How did you? You look amazing." "Brenda invited me," Eleanor said calmly, her eyes sweeping over the crowded room. "This is quite a house, David, very large." Throughout the evening, Eleanor was the center of attention. Everyone wanted to meet the town's mysterious new philanthropist. She shared charming anecdotes, laughed easily, and never once mentioned her son or daughter-in-law. She watched as Tiffany's face grew tighter and tighter with jealousy and confusion. The party she had designed to crown herself queen was being stolen by the woman she had discarded. Finally, as waiters served champagne for a toast, Eleanor decided it was time. She found David and Tiffany standing by the massive glass doors overlooking their pool. "A beautiful party, Tiffany," Eleanor began, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "Eleanor," Tiffany hissed, her facade cracking. "What is this? What are you playing at?" Playing? I'm not playing, I'm simply reinvesting. Eleanor took a sip of her water. You know, I was so sad when you sold the old house. So many memories, so I bought it back. David's face went pale. What? But the Millers bought it. And I bought it from the Millers, for cash. It's funny, the things you can do when you have the resources. Your father, David, was a very clever man. He left me a rather substantial fail-safe. Tiffany stared at her, her mind racing. What are you talking about? Frank was a carpenter. He was, Eleanor agreed. But he was also a founding investor in Omnigen Dynamics. Perhaps you've heard of them? The name hung in the air. Omnigen was a legend. Their recent acquisition had been front page news for weeks. Tiffany's perfectly lipsticked mouth fell open. The blood drained from David's face, leaving him looking gray and ill. No, David whispered. That's impossible. Is it? Eleanor's smile was serene. You sold my home, the home your father built, to level up. You triggered the one clause in his will that released his investments to me. So, in a way, I have you both to thank for my new circumstances. She let that sink in before delivering the final blows. Your interior design business is lovely, Tiffany. I'm sure it will do well, though you might have some competition. I've just acquired the old downtown gallery. I'm launching a high-end design collective and architectural firm. We're bringing in talent from New York and Chicago. It's called the Vance Franklin Group. Tiffany looked as if she'd been slapped. Eleanor then turned her gaze to her son. Her voice was devoid of all warmth. And David, I've been reviewing the quarterly reports for your company. Performance is a bit sluggish. As the new majority shareholder, I'm going to be implementing some significant changes. We need to trim the fat. My office will call you to schedule your performance review for Monday. Don't be late. She looked from her son's horrified face to her daughter-in-law's mask of disbelief and rage. She saw the life they had built on her heartbreak crumbling around them. They were socially and financially ruined in a single evening by the woman they had deemed worthless. Eleanor felt a calm settle over her. It wasn't glee. It was a sense of justice, a restoration of balance. She had honored Frank's memory. She had reclaimed her life. She placed her water glass on a passing tray. If you'll excuse me, she said, her voice clear and strong, I have a donation to announce for the new Children's Hospital wing. It's been a pleasure. Without a backward glance, she walked away, leaving her son and his wife standing like statues in the ruins of their shallow, glittering world. She moved through the party, a queen in her own right, leaving the cold, sterile house behind and walking toward the warm, bright future she would build for herself. The smell of old paper and lavender was gone. Her new life smelled of opportunity, strength, and the sweet, sweet scent of revenge. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow-motion demolition of David and Tiffany's life. The story of Eleanor's return and the stunning revelation of her fortune spread through Maple Creek like wildfire, fanned by the delighted gossip of Brenda Henderson and every other guest who had witnessed the takedown. Tiffany's Designs by Tiffany became an instant punchline. Her clients, fickle and status-obsessed, began canceling their contracts, flocking instead to get on the waitlist for the new, impossibly chic Vance Franklin Group. The lavish house in Willow Creek Estates, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a gilded cage, its cavernous, minimalist rooms echoing with their failure. David's performance review on Monday was exactly as brutal as Eleanor had promised. It wasn't conducted by her, of course. She was far too busy. It was handled by a crisp, no-nonsense executive she'd hired, a woman named Miss Albright whose smile was as sharp as a stiletto. David was demoted from his senior marketing position to a junior role in a department he knew nothing about, data entry. His salary was slashed by 70%. When he tried to protest, citing his years of experience, Miss Albright simply slid a file across the table. It was a detailed report of his mediocre performance over the last 2 years, highlighting missed targets and uninspired campaigns. It was clear the takeover had been meticulously planned. He was being kept on, Eleanor knew, not out of kindness, but as a daily, humiliating reminder of who was in charge. The financial pressure mounted almost immediately. The mortgage on the Willow Creek house was astronomical. Their lavish lifestyle, the country club membership, the European cars, Lily's private school, had been predicated on a continuous upward trajectory. Now they were in a nosedive. Tiffany, stripped of her social standing and budding career, became a different person. The cool, serene facade crumbled, revealing a core of bitter, shrewish anger. The house was no longer filled with the chatter of friends and the clinking of champagne glasses, but with the shrill sound of her recriminations. "This is your fault, David," she would scream, her voice bouncing off the cold marble floors. Your mother, you were supposed to handle her. You let that old woman ruin us. What was I supposed to do, Tiff? He'd fire back, his voice weary and defeated. She has $150 million. She owns my company. She owns half the town. Eleanor, meanwhile, was thriving. She had moved back into her old house, but it was not the same house. With a team from her new design firm, she had lovingly restored and updated it. Frank's handcrafted furniture, which she painstakingly tracked down and bought back from antique dealers and online marketplaces, was professionally refinished. The old floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by elegant, textured paint in warm, inviting colors. The house was no longer a shrine to the past, but a testament to a resilient and powerful present. It felt like home again, but stronger, more beautiful. She poured her energy and her fortune into Maple Creek. The Vance Franklin Foundation became a local powerhouse, funding a new library wing, revitalizing the downtown park, and offering scholarships to underprivileged students. She wasn't just a wealthy woman. She was a beloved matriarch of the community, the very thing Tiffany had tried to erase. She hosted elegant, quiet dinner parties, not for social climbing, but for artists, academics, and community leaders. Her name was synonymous with grace, generosity, and an iron will. One person she did not forget was Lily. Through Mr. Abernathy, she set up an anonymous trust for her granddaughter's education, ensuring Lily would have every opportunity, regardless of her parents' foolishness. But she made no move to see her. The wound of their last visit to Shady Pines, of Lily's pitying stare, was still too raw. She needed to heal herself before she could mend that bridge. The breaking point for David and Tiffany came 3 months after the party. They were officially broke. They had defaulted on their mortgage, and the foreclosure notice had arrived. The country club had revoked their membership for non-payment. The flashy SUV had been repossessed. Tiffany's designer handbags were being sold one by one on a luxury consignment website. Humiliation was their new reality. One evening, Eleanor was in her study, reviewing plans for a new community arts center, when her doorbell rang. It was David. He looked terrible. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit hung on him like a scarecrow's rags. He didn't speak at first, just stood on the porch of the house he had so callously sold, looking at the warm light spilling out from within. "Can I come in?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. Eleanor considered him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded and stepped aside. He walked into the foyer and stopped, looking around in disbelief. The house was both familiar and entirely new. It was beautiful, it was perfect. It was everything he had thrown away. "Mom, he faltered, the words catching in his throat. "I am so sorry." They sat in the living room on the comfortable, familiar sofa that Frank had built. Eleanor listened in silence as David poured out the whole miserable story: Tiffany's ambition, his own weakness, the mounting debts, the constant fighting, the foreclosure. He cried, not with the performative tears of a child caught in a lie, but with the deep, racking sobs of a man who has lost everything, including his self-respect. "We're losing the house," he finished, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Tiffany, she's talking about leaving, taking Lily and going back to her parents in Ohio. We have nothing left." Eleanor listened, her heart a strange mix of cold satisfaction and a stubborn, lingering maternal pity. This was what she had wanted. This was the justice she had sought. But seeing her son so utterly broken was not the victory she had imagined. "What do you want from me, David?" she asked, her voice even. "I don't know," he whispered. "Help. Forgiveness I don't deserve either." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "Is this it, Mom? Are you just going to watch us drown?" This was the moment of truth, the moment all her planning had led to. She could offer him a handout, a bailout that would solve his immediate problems but teach him nothing. Or she could let him and Tiffany face the full consequences of their actions. But then there was Lily, an innocent pawn caught in the middle. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street she loved. Frank's Street. "I will not save your house in Willow Creek," she said, her back to him. "That monument to your greed can be consumed by the bank for all I care. I will not restore your former salary or position. You will work your way back up from the bottom, or you will find another job. If you can." She heard a sharp intake of breath behind her. "I will not give Tiffany a single dime," she continued, her voice hardening. "Her problems are of her own making. If she wants to leave, I will not stop her. But Lily will not be a casualty of your failures." She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "Here is my offer. You will sell whatever you have left. You will declare bankruptcy if you must. You will face the public humiliation you have earned. You will get rid of the lifestyle you cannot afford, and you will move in here. David stared at her, dumbfounded. Here? In this house. In the guest room upstairs. You, Tiffany, and Lily. You will live under my roof by my rules. Tiffany will not be a lady of leisure. She will help with the cooking and the cleaning just as I did for years. You will go to your menial job every day. You will have no allowance, only a roof over your heads and food on the table. You will learn humility. You will learn gratitude. And you will learn the value of family, not as an asset to be liquidated, but as something to be cherished. She let the offer hang in the air, its terms as rigid as iron. You will do this until you have paid back, through your own hard work, every penny of the equity you stole from this house. Only then will you be free to leave. That is my offer, take it or leave it. It was a masterful stroke. It wasn't just punishment, it was a path to potential redemption, paved with utter humiliation. She wasn't just taking away their money. She was taking away their autonomy, placing them directly under her control in the very house they had taken from her. David sat in stunned silence for a full minute. He looked around the room, at the ghosts of his childhood, at the reality of his present failure, and at the impossible, terrible mercy his mother was offering. I'll take it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know about Tiffany, but I'll take it. Getting Tiffany to agree was a battle. She raged, she screamed, she accused David of betrayal. But in the end, with no money, no friends, and nowhere else to go, she had no choice. A week later, a single moving van, a fraction of the size of the one that had moved them to Willow Creek, pulled up to Eleanor's house. Tiffany stepped out, her face a mask of sullen fury, followed by a confused and quiet Lily. The new arrangement was excruciating for everyone. Tiffany, forced to trade her designer dresses for an apron, was hostile and resentful. She performed her chores with a barely concealed rage, slamming pots and pans, and speaking to Eleanor only when absolutely necessary. David was quiet and withdrawn, leaving early for his day-to-entry job and returning late, the shame of his demotion a constant weight on his shoulders. But Eleanor was unyielding. She ran her household with the same calm, firm authority with which she ran her business empire. There were rules, there were schedules, there were expectations. She was not cruel, but she was implacable. The only bright spot was Lily. Away from the tension and materialism of her parents' life, the little girl began to blossom. Eleanor spent hours with her in the garden, teaching her the names of flowers just as Frank had taught her. They baked cookies in the sunny kitchen. Eleanor would read to her in the evenings from the same books she had read to David as a child. In her granddaughter, Eleanor saw a chance to rebuild what had been broken. One afternoon, about a month into their new life, Eleanor found Tiffany in the kitchen, staring at an old photograph on the refrigerator. It was a picture of a much younger Eleanor and Frank, laughing, their arms around each other, standing on the unfinished frame of the house. He really loved you, Tiffany said, her voice surprisingly soft. It was the first time she had spoken to Eleanor without venom. Yes, Eleanor replied simply. He did. I had a ring like that once, Tiffany said, pointing to the simple, elegant engagement ring on Eleanor's finger in the photo. David gave it to me. I sold it last month to pay the electric bill. She looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, Eleanor didn't see a villain. She saw a young woman who had gotten lost, who had chased after a glittering, empty prize and had paid a terrible price for it. Eleanor didn't offer sympathy. It was too soon for that, but she nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. A tiny crack had appeared in the wall of Tiffany's anger. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. The path ahead would be long and difficult. David and Tiffany had to rebuild their lives, their marriage, and their own self-worth from the ground up. Eleanor had to learn to navigate the complex terrain between justice and grace, between being a victor and being a mother. But as she stood in her kitchen, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, the smell of baking cookies in the air, and her granddaughter's laughter drifting in from the garden, Eleanor Vance knew one thing for certain. She had taken back her house. She had reclaimed her life, and in the process, she might just have saved her family from themselves. The ultimate revenge, she was beginning to understand, was not destruction, but a forced and painful reconstruction. Life in the house on Maple Creek Drive settled into a strange, tense rhythm. The days were structured around Eleanor's quiet but unshakable authority. Mornings began not with the lazy scrolling of social media and lattes, but with the hum of the vacuum cleaner and the smell of bleach. Tiffany, who once paid a service to deep clean her glass house twice a week, now found herself on her hands and knees scrubbing floors she swore were already clean. She learned to cook, not the gourmet dishes she used to order for her parties, but wholesome, simple meals from Eleanor's old recipe box. Her hands, once soft and perfectly manicured, became chapped and raw. Every broken nail was a tiny, infuriating symbol of her downfall. Her resentment was a poison she sipped all day long. She hated the house. She hated the quiet judgment in Eleanor's eyes. Most of all, she hated the person she saw in the mirror. A failure, a charity case, a common housewife. The only thing that stopped her from packing a bag and running was the terrifying, bottomless void of having nowhere to run to. David, for his part, seemed to shrink. He left the house before dawn and returned after dusk, his face etched with the fatigue and anonymity of his new job. He spoke little, ate his dinner in silence, and retreated to their small guest room. The vibrant, ambitious man Tiffany had married was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell. In a strange way, his weakness angered her even more than Alina's strength. He had let this happen. He had failed her. The fragile piece of this new world was held together by Lily. The little girl was the sun in their cold, quiet solar system. For her, this new life was an adventure. She adored the big garden, the endless supply of freshly baked cookies, and the undivided attention of her grandmother. Eleanor would patiently help her with her homework, a task Tiffany had always outsourced to a tutor. She would tell her stories about her grandfather, Frank, making him a vivid, warm presence in the house. One Saturday afternoon, Tiffany was begrudgingly weeding the petunias, another of her new chores, when Brenda Henderson's sleek Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Tiffany froze, her heart pounding. She wanted to bolt, to hide in the house, but it was too late. Brenda, dressed in chic tennis whites, was already walking up the path, a wicker basket filled with what looked like expensive cheeses and wine in her hand. Tiffany. Darling, Brenda called out, her voice a little too bright. I was just dropping something off for Ellie. I had no idea she'd put you to work in the garden. How rustic. Tiffany felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She stood up, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her jeans. Hello, Brenda, Eleanor's inside. Brenda's eyes did a quick, merciless scan of Tiffany's appearance. The cheap jeans, the messy ponytail, the chipped nails. It was the same look she used to give the waitstaff at the country club. You know, Brenda said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, everyone is just dying to know what's going on. We all miss you at the club. Paul Henderson was just saying the other day, whatever happened to that dynamic Vance couple? The question hung in the air, dripping with malice. Tiffany's throat went dry. She could feel the carefully constructed dam of her composure begin to crack. But before she could respond, the front door opened and Eleanor stepped out. She smiled warmly at Brenda. Brenda, how lovely of you to stop by, and thank you for the basket. We'll enjoy this. Then she turned her gaze to Tiffany, and her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Tiffany has been a tremendous help. I don't know what I'd do without her. My old back isn't what it used to be for all this bending. Brenda looked from Alina's serene face to Tiffany's stunned one. It wasn't what she had expected. She had come for gossip, for a little drama, but Alina had diffused the situation with a simple, public statement of support. It was a subtle act of defense, and it completely wrong-footed Brenda. Well, Brenda said, recovering quickly, that's lovely. I'll let you two get back to it. She gave a tight little wave and scurried back to her car, her mission a failure. Tiffany stared at her mother-in-law. It was the first time Alina had shown her any form of solidarity, any kindness at all. It was a small gesture, but in Tiffany's desolate world, it felt monumental. She didn't say thank you. The words wouldn't come. But as she turned back to the flower bed, the weeds didn't seem quite as monstrous. For David, salvation came in the form of sawdust. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating silence of the guest room, he wandered out to the garage. Frank's old workshop was just as it had always been. The tools hung neatly on a pegboard, their wooden handles worn smooth with use. A faint, sweet smell of pine and oil still lingered in the air. For the first time in months, David felt a sense of peace. He saw a wobbly dining chair tucked in the corner, one Alina had mentioned needed fixing. On an impulse, he picked up his father's tools. He wasn't a master carpenter like Frank, but he had spent enough time here as a boy to know the basics. He worked for hours, losing himself in the simple, honest labor. He sanded, glued, and clamped the broken leg. He tightened every joint. When he was done, the chair was as solid as the day his father had made it. He carried it back into the house and placed it at the dining table. He didn't say anything, but the next morning, he saw Alina running her hand over the seamless repair, a small, thoughtful smile on her face. The workshop became his sanctuary. After his humiliating days at the office, he would retreat to the garage and work with his hands. He repaired a creaky floorboard, built a new birdhouse for the garden with Lily, and even started sketching out a design for a new bookshelf for his daughter's room. In the wood, in the familiar heft of his father's tools, he began to find the pieces of his own shattered self respect. He was creating, not just consuming. He was fixing what was broken. Meanwhile, Eleanor's public life was flourishing. The Vance Franklin Foundation was her passion project, and its centerpiece was the construction of the new Maple Creek Community Arts Center. It was a massive undertaking, designed to be the cultural heart of the town. But with great projects come great scrutiny. The crisis hit on a Wednesday. A reporter from the state's leading investigative journal published an exposé on the primary construction contractor Eleanor's team had hired. The article, filled with damning evidence and anonymous sources, accused the company of using substandard materials in other projects and having deep ties to a corrupt city inspector. Overnight, Eleanor's passion project turned into a PR nightmare. The story wasn't just about a bad contractor. It was framed to look like the new town philanthropist had either been negligent or was trying to cut corners. Her reputation was on the line. Her team of high-powered lawyers and financial advisors immediately went into damage control. Their advice was cold and corporate. Issue a press release, terminate the contract, sue the construction company for damages, and find a new, more expensive firm to finish the job. Eleanor sat in her study, on the phone with her lead counsel, feeling deeply frustrated. "You're not listening, Robert," she said, her voice tight. "This isn't a Wall Street merger. This is a community project. Suing them and issuing a sterile press release makes us look defensive and secretive. It doesn't rebuild trust. It makes us look like we have something to hide." She hung up the phone, rubbing her temples. Her team was brilliant with numbers and contracts, but they didn't understand the heart of a small town. They didn't understand that trust, once broken, couldn't be won back with legal threats. From the hallway, David had overheard the entire conversation. He'd heard the panic in her voice, the frustration. He knew the world of marketing and public relations. He knew his mother's team was giving her terrible advice. They were treating a wound that needed a gentle touch with a sledgehammer. He retreated to his room, his mind racing. He thought about the people of Maple Creek. He thought about his mother's vision. He thought about what his father, a man who valued integrity above all else, would do. For hours, he sat with a notepad, sketching out a plan. It was audacious, it was risky, and it was the complete opposite of what her lawyers were advising. Late that night, long after the house had fallen silent, David crept downstairs to the study. He placed a single, neatly handwritten page on the center of his mother's large oak desk. He didn't sign it. He just left it there, a silent offering, and retreated back into the shadows of his penance. The next morning, Eleanor entered her study with a heavy heart, preparing for another day of battling with her own team. Then she saw the piece of paper on her desk. She recognized David's handwriting immediately. She picked it up, her curiosity piqued. The proposal was titled The Maple Creek Integrity Project. It was not a legal strategy. It was a community one. It had 3 phases. Phase 1, radical transparency. Instead of a press release, he proposed Eleanor host a town hall meeting, not in some stuffy boardroom, but at the local high school auditorium. She would stand before the town, present all the facts, admit her team had made a mistake in vetting the contractor, and answer every single question, no matter how hostile. Phase 2, community oversight. He proposed firing the contractor immediately. But instead of hiring another faceless corporation, the foundation would form a new construction committee. This committee would be made up of respected local builders, union leaders, and even interested citizens. They would oversee the hiring of local subcontractors for every phase of the project, ensuring the money and the jobs stayed in Maple Creek. Phase 3, the Frank Vance Promise. The final and most brilliant point. The Arts Center would be renamed the Frank Vance Center for the Arts. And Eleanor would publicly pledge that every structural beam, every foundation pour, would be personally inspected and signed off on by a new, independent quality control expert hired by the community committee. It was a promise of a carpenter's integrity, invoked in the name of her late husband. It was personal, heartfelt, and unassailable. Eleanor read the proposal twice, then a third time. The genius of it was in its humility and its deep understanding of the town's values. It turned a corporate crisis into a community building opportunity. It transformed a story of potential corruption into a story of integrity and transparency. It was something her $1 million-an-hour consultants would never have conceived of. For the first time since the day she'd inherited her fortune, Eleanor felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: pride in her son. Not for who he was trying to be, but for who he truly was, a man who, despite his failings, still understood the importance of a good name. She looked at the handwritten page, at the blueprint for saving her legacy. She had a choice. She could stick with her expensive, professional team, or she could take a chance on this idea from her disgraced, demoted son. A slow smile spread across her face. This was a far more interesting challenge than simply writing checks. She picked up her phone, but she didn't call her lawyer. She called Miss Albright, the sharp-tongued executive who now ran David's old company. Miss Albright, Eleanor said, her voice crisp and clear, I have a new project for you. I'm putting together a special task force to handle the PR for the new arts center, and I know just the man to lead it. The announcement that David Vance, the disgraced former marketing guru now toiling in data entry, was being tapped to lead the public relations effort for the foundation's biggest and most troubled project, sent shockwaves through the company. Miss Albright, ever the professional, executed Eleanor's directive without question, but the internal memo sparked a flurry of confused and derisive chatter. To everyone else, it looked like a spectacular act of nepotism, a mother inexplicably rewarding her failed son. No one knew that the entire strategy was David's own creation. David learned of his new role not from his mother, but from a coldly formal email from Miss Albright summoning him to the executive suite. He walked into the sprawling corner office he himself had once occupied, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. Miss Albright was waiting for him, her expression as unreadable as ever. David, she said, gesturing to a chair, as of this morning, you are being temporarily reassigned. You will be heading the special projects team for the Frank Vance Center for the Arts. Your sole objective is to manage the current public relations crisis and see the Maple Creek Integrity Project through to a successful conclusion. She slid a file across the desk. It was his own handwritten proposal, now typed, bound, and stamped with the Foundation's official seal. Your mother believes you are the man for the job. See that you don't prove her wrong. There was no congratulations, no warmth. It was a command. He was being given a chance, but it was a chance on a razor's edge. Failure would be public, spectacular, and final. He walked out of the office in a daze, the file clutched in his hand. He wasn't back in his old job. He wasn't a senior executive. He was a temporary project manager with an impossible task, reporting directly to the woman who had fired him from his real career. But it was a chance. It was a lifeline. That evening at home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Tiffany had heard the rumors through the Maple Creek grapevine, and her eyes were a mixture of disbelief and a desperate, rekindled hope. Eleanor, however, said nothing. She didn't mention the proposal, she didn't mention his new role. She simply served dinner as she always did, her calm demeanor giving nothing away. It was a silent message, I have given you the rope. Now it is up to you to either climb or hang yourself with it. David threw himself into the work with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about selling a product. It was about rebuilding a legacy. He worked 18-hour days from a small, borrowed office, coordinating every detail of the town hall meeting. He drafted the speeches, prepared binders of facts and figures for the press, and personally called community leaders to invite them. Tiffany watched his transformation with a bewildered sense of awe. The defeated, hollowed-out man who came home each night was gone. In his place was a man filled with a quiet, intense purpose. He was focused, he was sharp, and for the first time in a very long time, he seemed to respect himself. One evening, she found him asleep at the kitchen table, his head resting on a pile of blueprints, his glasses askew. A half-written press release was on the laptop screen in front of him. For a moment, she saw a glimmer of the man she had first fallen in love with. Without thinking, she gently took off his glasses, turned off the laptop, and draped a blanket over his shoulders. It was a small, tender gesture in the Cold War of their marriage, but it was not insignificant. The night of the town hall meeting, the high school auditorium was packed. The air crackled with a mixture of anger, skepticism, and raw curiosity. Reporters from across the state had set up cameras in the back. This was the first time Eleanor Vance would publicly address the scandal. David stood in the wings, his stomach in knots. He had prepped his mother for hours, going over potential questions, refining her talking points. But now it was out of his hands. Eleanor walked onto the stage. She did not stand behind the podium. Instead, she walked to the front, holding only a single microphone, putting herself on the same level as the audience. She looked out at the sea of faces, her neighbors, her fellow citizens, and began to speak. Her voice was not the voice of a corporate titan, but of a concerned member of their community. She followed David's script to the letter. She was honest, she was direct, and she was humble. She admitted her team's failure in vetting the contractor. She took full responsibility. A building is only as strong as its foundation, she said, her voice ringing with sincerity. And the foundation of this community is trust. Tonight, I am here to tell you that I have failed that trust, and I am here to tell you how I intend to earn it back. When she finished laying out the Maple Creek Integrity Project, the room was silent. Then came the questions. They were tough, pointed, and relentless. But Eleanor, armed with David's meticulous preparation, answered every single one. She never faltered, never became defensive. The turning point came when a grizzled, older man in a flannel shirt stood up. He was Joe Mulligan, a retired builder and one of the most respected craftsmen in town. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice gruff, "that all sounds real nice, but talk is cheap. You're talking about my grandkids playing in this building. How can we really know it's safe?" This was the moment David had prepared her for. Eleanor looked directly at Joe Mulligan. "You are absolutely right, Mr. Mulligan, which is why the new Community Oversight Committee will have absolute authority to sign off on every stage of construction. In fact," she paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, "I would be honored if you would agree to be the chairman of that committee." A murmur went through the auditorium. It was a brilliant, unexpected move. By offering the role to her most vocal and credible critic, she was demonstrating a level of transparency that was irrefutable. Joe Mulligan, stunned into silence for a moment, simply nodded. And with that single nod, the tide of public opinion turned. The town hall ended not with anger, but with a round of firm, respectful applause. Backstage, David felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. She had done it. They had done it. Eleanor came off the stage, her face calm but her eyes shining. She walked directly up to him, past the lawyers and advisors. She put her hands on his shoulders, a gesture she hadn't made since he was a boy. "Your father would have been proud of you tonight, David," she said softly, for his ears only. Tears sprang to David's eyes. It was more than forgiveness. It was validation. It was the one thing he had been starving for. The project became a model of community engagement. David, acting as the foundation's liaison, worked tirelessly with Mulligan's new committee. They hired local crews, sourced materials from regional suppliers, and posted weekly progress reports on a public website. The story in the state paper changed from one of scandal to one of inspiring renewal. David, the anonymous project manager, was quietly and effectively rebuilding his own reputation right alongside the Arts Center. As the building began to take shape, so did the fractured relationships within the house on Maple Creek Drive. The shared purpose of the project gave David and Tiffany something to talk about again. She would listen, genuinely interested, as he described the challenges of the day. She even started to volunteer at the project's community outreach office, using her long dormant organizational skills to help coordinate schedules. She wasn't the queen bee anymore. She was just one of a dozen volunteers, and to her own surprise, she found she didn't mind. The simple act of being useful was more satisfying than any society gala had ever been. One evening, Eleanor came home to find the house filled with the smell of roasting chicken and the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. She paused in the doorway. David, Tiffany, and Lily were all sitting at the kitchen table, working on a poster for the Arts Center's upcoming topping out ceremony. They were working together, smiling, functioning as a family. It had been nearly a year since she had reclaimed her home. A year of retribution, of painful lessons, and of slow, laborious rebuilding. Looking at the scene in her kitchen, Eleanor realized her plan had worked better than she could have ever imagined. She had sought to humble her son and daughter-in-law, to make them understand what they had lost. But in doing so, she had given them something far more valuable, a chance to find themselves again. The revenge was complete, but the story, she realized, was not over. Now came the hard part, learning how to be a family again, not on her terms or theirs, but on new ground they had all built together.